You are watching Bygone Treasures, your source for everything history and geopolitics, now in session.
The British Empire at the time was the largest and most far-flung in history, and conflict could occur anywhere in that empire.
It is largely agreed upon that the Anglo-Zanzibar War of 1896, which lasted for a grand total of 38 minutes, is the shortest war in the history of the world.
The Anglo-Zanzibar War of 1896 might have been the littlest of all, and yet the war that is recognized by Guinness as the shortest in world history.
In the year 1890, Britain and Germany signed a contract that established the territory of Heligoland, Zanzibar. This is where the story begins.
The East African island, or actually archipelago, of Zanzibar is today part of a political union making up the nation of Tanzania.
Zanzibar was granted to the British, and Germany was awarded sovereignty over the mainland of Tanzania as a result of this treaty, which essentially established spheres of influence amongst the imperial powers in East Africa. Taking advantage of this newly discovered power, the British government made Zanzibar a protectorate of the British Empire and proceeded to appoint their very own puppet Sultan to exercise authority over the region.
In 1890, a new Sultan agreed to make Zanzibar a British protectorate, and in the agreement agreed that the British would be allowed to veto any future appointment of a new Sultan.
It was in the year 1893 that Hamad bin Thuwaini, who had previously been a supporter of the British in the region, was appointed to the position. A little more than 3 years passed before Sultan Khalid Hamad passed away unexpectedly in his palace on August 25, 1896. During that time, he presided over this reasonably calm dominion. Even though the truth regarding the circumstances surrounding his passing may never be completely known, it is widely thought that his cousin Khalid bin Bargash, who is depicted on the right, was the one who brought about his death by poisoning him.
Although the truth will never be fully known about the causes for his death, it is widely believed that his cousin Khalid had him poisoned.
Within a few hours of Hamad's death, Khalid had already moved into the palace and taken the title of Sultan, all without the knowledge of the British government. This idea is further strengthened by the fact that Khalid had established himself as the Sultan.
But he quickly took command of 1,200 of the late Sultan's troops and seized the palace with the obvious intention of proclaiming himself the new Sultan.
The British diplomats stationed in the area were not pleased at all with this turn of events. Basil Cave, who was the head diplomat in the region, promptly proclaimed that Khalid ought to step down. When Khalid was given these warnings, he chose to disregard them and instead began to collect his soldiers around the palace. These forces were remarkably well armed. However, it is important to note that quite a few of their firearms and cannons were really diplomatic presents that had been handed to the former Sultan during the course of his reign. By the time the 25th of August came to a close, Khalid had defended his palace with about 3,000 soldiers, several artillery guns, and even a royal yacht that was only moderately armed and positioned in the neighbouring harbour. Caves of Basel. At the same time, the British already had 2 warships docked in the harbour. These were the HMS Philomel and the HMS Rush. Additionally, troops were being deployed ashore as rapidly as possible to guard the British consulate and to prevent the local population from rioting. Cave, which is depicted on the right, also made a plea for assistance from another British ship that was approaching from the vicinity, the HMS Sparrow, which arrived in the harbour on the evening of August 25th. Even though Cave maintained a sizable armed force in the harbour, he was well aware that he did not possess the right to initiate hostilities without first receiving explicit authorization from the British government.
But he had cabled the Foreign Office and waited for more instruction before taking action.
To be ready for anything that may happen, he sent a cable to the Foreign Office that evening with the following question: "Are we authorized, if all attempts at a peaceful solution prove to be futile, to fire on the palace from the men of war?" During the time that Cave was waiting for a response from Whitehall, he continued to issue ultimatums to Khalid, but they were unsuccessful. It was the following day that 2 other British warships, the HMS Raccoon and the HMS St George, reached the harbour. The latter of these boats was carrying Rear Admiral Harry Rawson, who was the commander of the British Navy in the region. During the same period, Cave had been received by Whitehall with a telegram that stated, "You have the authority to take any actions that you see necessary, and the government of Her Majesty will provide support for you in carrying out your decision. On the other hand, you should not make any attempt to carry out any activity that you are not convinced you will be able to complete properly."
This evening, an ultimatum was sent to Saeed Khalid, informing that unless he strikes his flag and makes a complete surrender by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, the palace will be bombarded.
In the final ultimatum that was delivered to Khalid on the 26th of August, it was demanded that he depart the palace by 9 o'clock the following morning. Additionally, Cave commanded that all the boats that were not military vessels leave the harbour in order to get ready for the conflict that was to come. At 8 o'clock the following morning, which was barely 1 hour before the deadline had passed, Khalid emailed Cave a response in which he stated, "We have no intention of bringing down our flag, and we do not believe that you would open fire on us," the statement read. Ave responded in a manner that was characteristic of British diplomacy throughout the 19th century, declaring that he had no intention of firing against the palace, but that unless you do as you're instructed, we would surely continue to do so. It was about 9 in the morning when the British ships that were docked in the harbour were given the order to begin bombarding the palace. That was the last time that Cave heard from Khalid. By 9 minutes and 2 seconds, the majority of Khalid's artillery had been destroyed, and the timber structure of the palace had begun to disintegrate, despite the presence of 3,000 defenders within. It is also at this time, 2 minutes after the bombardment started, that Khalid is claimed to have departed through a back exit of the palace, leaving his servants and fighters to defend the palace alone.
By 9:40, the shelling had ceased, the Sultan's flag pulled down, and the shortest war in history had officially ended after only 38 minutes.
Shelling had stopped by 9:40, the Sultan's flag had been brought down, and the war that had been going on for the shortest amount of time in history had officially come to an end after only 38 minutes. The fatality count was extremely high for such a brief war, with over 500 of Khalid's fighters being killed or wounded. This was primarily due to the high explosive shells that exploded on the palace's fragile framework. In addition, a British petty officer sustained severe injuries, but he emerged from the hospital in a healthy state.
A new Sultan, even more indebted to the British, was duly installed the same day.
After Khalid was removed from power, the United Kingdom was able to install the pro-British Sultan Hamud on the throne of Zanzibar. He reigned on behalf of Her Majesty's government for the subsequent 6 years. By the time Khalid arrived at the local German consulate, he had successfully evaded capture along with a small group of devoted followers. The German Navy was able to transport him out of the country on October 2nd, even though the British government had repeatedly requested that he be extradited. He was then brought to what is now the country of Tanzania. In 1916, when British forces invaded East Africa, Khalid was ultimately arrested and then sent to St. Helena for exile. This occurred after Khalid had been taken captive. Following his serving time, he was eventually granted permission to return to East Africa, where he passed away in 1927. Not only because of its brevity, but also because of what it exposes about the imperialist dynamics of the time period. The Anglo-Zanzibar War of 1896 continues to be a striking footnote in history. In under 38 minutes, the British Empire reaffirmed its authority by employing the full might of modern naval power. As a result, centuries of Zanzibari sovereignty were reduced to ruins. The conflict, despite its speed, left behind reverberations that will continue for a long time. It was the pinnacle of colonial arrogance, the twilight of Zanzibar's independence, and the stark reality of technological disparity in battle. All of these events occurred simultaneously. Khalid's escape and final exile reflect the futility of resistance against the machinery of the empire, while the sad loss of life highlights the human cost of imperial ambition. A transitory struggle that forever altered the path of Zanzibar's history, leaving its legacy carved in the annals of both success and tragedy. Even though it is frequently neglected, the war's brevity is both its claim to fame and its greatest irony. This has been Bygone Treasures. Enjoyed the content? Don't forget to like, subscribe and drop a comment below. Your support keeps us going. Let us know your thoughts.